a scrap space vehicle everyone ignored, transformed into a weapon by a human mechanic. Ships of all shapes and sizes floated in the bays, some shining like new, others scarred and battered from decades of travel. Among them, in a quiet corner where the shadows lingered, sat a ship that no one remembered and no one cared about. Its hull was scratched and dented, its paint faded and peeling. A freighter, some called it. Broken, others said. Rusted, obsolete, a relic from a forgotten era, it was the kind of ship that everyone ignored, except for Lyra Kane. Lyra walked through the docks with her tool belt swinging at her waist. Her boots echoed against the metal walkways, but she barely noticed. She had spent her life surrounded by ships, but she saw them differently from everyone else. Where others saw scrap, she saw potential. Where others saw failure, she saw possibility. And today, her eyes had fallen on the freighter everyone else had written off. The aliens at the docking station didn't even look up when she approached. A pair of tall, blue-skinned engineers laughed as they measured the hull of a sleek patrol vessel, completely ignoring the freighter. "That old thing," one said, his voice like gravel. "It won't even hold together if you try to start it." Lyra smiled, a quiet, almost mischievous smile. "That's what makes it interesting," she whispered to herself. She ran her hands over the cold metal of the hull. There were patches where the paint had bubbled and cracked, spots where rust had eaten away at the structure. The engines were outdated, the wiring was messy, and the ship's design was a hodgepodge of old human technology and half-forgotten alien modifications. And yet, there was something in it. A rhythm, a heartbeat, a faint trace of brilliance buried under years of neglect. Lyra crouched beside a panel that had been pried open, revealing a maze of wires. She traced them with her fingers, noting where they had been repaired in haste, where they had been ignored. There were gaps in the logic of the design, places where any other mechanic would see only flaws, but she could see the patterns. She could see how the pieces were meant to work together. "Someone built this to survive anything," she murmured. "Maybe it can do more than float." She had been sent to the docks to catalog ships for scrap. The Galactic Council had ordered a review of all abandoned vessels, and anything beyond repair was to be melted down for parts. Most of her alien colleagues followed the list like a sacred text. They walked from ship to ship, checking boxes, taking notes, and moving on. Lyra, however, had a different approach. She looked at each ship as a puzzle, a challenge, a story waiting to be told. The freighter, she decided, was a story worth telling. She pulled out her scanner and ran a diagnostic. The screen flickered and beeped, confirming what she already knew. Most of the systems were offline. Life support, navigation, propulsion, they were all either damaged or outdated. A normal mechanic would have shrugged and moved on. Lyra, however, saw opportunity. She made notes, drew diagrams, and began planning. By the time the sun of Orion station dipped behind the massive docking towers, she had a blueprint in her mind. But she wasn't the only one who noticed the freighter. Across the dock, a group of alien engineers whispered among themselves, their antennae twitching nervously. "That human," one said, shaking his head. "She wastes her time on junk." "She won't get anywhere," another replied. "The council already declared it useless." Lyra ignored them. She had learned long ago that opinions were a poor guide to what was possible. Humans were underestimated everywhere they went, and that often worked to their advantage. She had seen it again and again. Humans, clever and stubborn, turning the impossible into reality. This freighter, abandoned and forgotten, might just be her next masterpiece. She spent the night in the docking bay, her tools scattered around her. She replaced corroded wires, patched small leaks, and tested ancient thrusters that creaked and groaned under their own weight. Every repair was careful, precise, and imaginative. Where an alien engineer might follow the manual to the letter, Lyra improvised. She combined old designs with new techniques, finding ways to make the freighter do things no one had expected. By the time the station's artificial sun rose, The freighter was still a shadow of its former self, but it had life again. The engines hummed softly, a promise of movement. The shields flickered to life, weak but functional. Lyra stepped back and wiped her hands on her overalls. She was exhausted, but her eyes shone with satisfaction. "This is only the beginning," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We're going to make something incredible." The aliens continued to scoff. They didn't understand. They didn't see what she saw, and for now, that was fine. Lyra spent the next few days exploring every inch of the ship. She discovered hidden compartments that could store more than cargo, places for tools, drones, and devices she hadn't even imagined using yet. She found redundancies in the engines that allowed for backup power in case of failure. And she uncovered old Earth designs, long thought obsolete, that were astonishingly clever. She smiled every time she realized how the original human engineers had anticipated problems and built solutions into the ship itself. But not everyone at the station was so amused. One day, a council inspector floated over, his blue eyes narrowing as he looked at her work. "You know this ship is scheduled for scrapping," he said, his voice cold. "Why are you wasting resources?" Lyra didn't flinch. "Because it's not junk," she replied simply. "It has potential. It can do things no one else thinks possible." The inspector snorted. "Potential doesn't make it valuable. The freighter is obsolete. Nothing you do will change that." Lyra tilted her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "That's what everyone said about humans once, and look where we are now." He frowned, clearly uncomfortable with her confidence, and drifted away. Lyra returned to her work, her mind alive with ideas. If she could fix the engines and optimize the systems, the freighter could maneuver in ways larger ships could not. If she could repurpose the old mining lasers and combine them with her drones, it could neutralize obstacles without firing a shot. Every challenge she faced became a new opportunity to prove what humans could do when no one expected them to succeed. Days turned into weeks. Lyra's work attracted quiet attention. Some younger aliens watched her with curiosity, taking notes and asking questions. Others whispered warnings: "She's reckless, she's wasting time." But the freighter responded to her touch, its systems coming alive under her guidance. Each repair, each tweak, each adjustment was a small victory, a promise that the ship was more than the sum of its battered parts. One evening, as the station lights dimmed and the stars outside glimmered like scattered jewels, Lyra climbed into the cockpit. She ran a full diagnostic, her fingers dancing across the controls. The engines roared to life, not at full power but enough to move. The shields flickered and held steady. And for the first time in decades, the freighter floated freely in the docking bay, ready to show the galaxy what it could do. Lyra leaned back in her seat, exhausted but triumphant. She knew the council would never understand. She knew the aliens would never believe it. But she also knew something important. Humans thrived where others gave up. Humans turned problems into opportunities, failure into triumph, and junk into genius. And this freighter, this forgotten, scrapped vessel, was about to show the galaxy exactly what that meant. As she looked out at the stars, Lyra whispered to herself, "If they think this is just a broken old ship, they haven't seen anything yet." The Orion station hummed with life. Ships of all sizes floated lazily in the docking bays, engineers drifted along the walkways, and the occasional cargo transport shuttled in and out. To most people, it was just another busy day in the cluster. But for Lyra Kane, it was the start of something new. The freighter, the one everyone called a scrap heap, was no longer just a shell of metal. It breathed, it moved, it responded to her commands. But Lyra wasn't satisfied. Not yet. She wanted to see just how far it could go, how clever, how adaptable, how extraordinary a junk ship could be in human hands. She spent the early hours of the morning in the cockpit, tracing circuits, adjusting panels, and recalibrating the main engines. The sensors, outdated and misaligned, were her first priority. She replaced the worn lenses with recycled optics from smaller drones and modified the code so the sensors could detect movement across vast distances, even subtle gravitational shifts. Almost like giving it a brain, she murmured, eyes glued to the screens. Across the docking bay, a group of alien engineers watched her with thinly veiled amusement. Their tall forms loomed over the railing of a nearby walkway. "She's at it again," one muttered, antennae twitching. "She'll never get it right. The ship is ancient, it's useless." "Humans are strange," another replied. "They keep tinkering when it's pointless. They think anything is possible." Lyra ignored them. That was the beauty of humans. Others doubted them, laughed at them, and left them alone to work. She preferred it that way. By midday, the first real test began. The freighter was still fragile, but Lyra had installed a small set of modular drones. They floated around the ship like tiny sentinels, scanning the docking bay and adjusting the shields she had been refining. The shields were weak at first, barely holding together when she powered them fully, but she noticed something exciting. The energy didn't just deflect objects, it could manipulate them slightly. With careful adjustments, she could nudge floating debris or even small craft without touching them. Her eyes lit up. This wasn't just a freighter. This could be a tool, a deterrent, a weapon of influence that didn't hurt anyone but could protect anything. She tested it carefully, moving crates of supplies with the shield pulses. One by one, the drones hovered and guided the crates into perfect alignment, the freighter adjusting automatically to maintain balance. Lyra clapped her hands quietly. "Good, very good." Still, her alien colleagues remained skeptical. A tall, green-skinned engineer drifted closer, arms folded. "You waste too much energy on that thing," he said. "Even if it moves, it cannot match a real patrol vessel. You should give up and save your time." Lyra smiled, calm and unbothered. "I'm not trying to match them," she said. "I'm trying to do something they can't even imagine." As the sun of Orion's station dipped behind the docking towers, Lyra moved on to the engines. The main thrusters were old, barely functioning, and impossible to upgrade with standard methods. But humans had a talent for combining old and new. She scavenged parts from broken mining ships and smaller cargo drones, creating auxiliary boosters that worked in tandem with the old engines. She spent hours recalibrating the fuel lines, rerouting energy through the shield generators to create a feedback loop that increased efficiency. By nightfall, the freighter could accelerate faster than anyone expected. Not as fast as a patrol cruiser, but it had agility, something much more valuable. It could dodge, pivot, and react in ways no larger ship could manage. Lyra leaned back in the cockpit chair, tired but excited. "You're going to be something special," she whispered. The next day, Lyra decided to push the freighter further. She had discovered a hidden compartment near the cargo bay, a place no one had opened in decades. Inside, she found old human tech, small laser projectors, gravity modulators, and magnetic pulse generators. Most aliens would have discarded the items as useless scraps. Lyra, however, recognized the potential immediately. She spent hours experimenting, combining the lasers with the drones and the magnetic pulses. She discovered that she could manipulate objects in the freighter's path, stopping them gently or redirecting them without causing damage. Rocks, crates, even small shuttle drones could be moved with precision. She had created a non-lethal defensive system, something that could neutralize threats without violence. By the evening, she decided it was time for a full test. She guided the freighter out of the bay and into the outer docking space, a wide expanse where ships practiced maneuvers. Using the thrusters, drones, and shield pulses, she navigated through a maze of floating cargo and training drones. Every obstacle was a test, every movement a proof of concept, and the freighter responded flawlessly, moving with a grace no one expected from such an old vessel. "Perfect," Lyra said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. "Exactly what I hoped for." Still, the aliens were watching. One of the senior engineers floated down, curiosity finally overcoming skepticism. "I don't understand," he said. "How is it moving like that? The engines should not." Lyra cut him off with a small smile. "Humans see things differently. We don't just follow instructions. We improvise, adapt, and find solutions others ignore. That's why this ship works." He frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "You call that work?" Lyra laughed softly. "I call it thinking ahead, planning for what they don't even see coming. This ship is only the beginning." Over the next week, Lyra refined her techniques. She improved the drones' coordination, enhancing their ability to detect and neutralize objects in real time. She adjusted the shield algorithms to react automatically to sudden movement, creating a protective bubble that could deflect or redirect debris without harm. And she upgraded the engines further, giving the freighter a unique combination of speed, agility, and endurance. Word of her work began to spread quietly through the station. Some younger aliens, curious and eager to learn, floated near her bay, asking questions and taking notes. Others whispered among themselves, warning that humans were reckless and unpredictable. But Lyra welcomed their attention. If anyone wanted to see what a human mechanic could do, she was ready to show them. One evening, while she was testing a new drone formation, a small transport shuttle approached the station. Its pilot, a nervous young alien, struggled to dock properly. Lyra noticed immediately and used the freighter's drones to assist. They gently guided the shuttle into place, adjusting its trajectory and stabilizing it without touching it physically. The pilot floated out, amazed. "How?" he stammered. "How did you do that?" Lyra shrugged, a modest grin on her face. "Just a human way of solving problems." By now, the freighter was no longer a simple abandoned ship. It had become a machine of precision, intelligence, and adaptability. It could move where larger ships could not. It could protect without harming. And it could solve problems others hadn't even realized existed. But with progress came a new challenge. The Council had announced an upcoming inspection of all docking bays to determine which ships were worthy of being kept and which were to be scrapped. Lyra knew that if they discovered what she had done, the aliens in power might react with disbelief, or worse, dismiss it entirely. She had to prepare. She worked day and night, fine-tuning systems, running simulations, and testing limits. She programmed the drones to respond automatically to threats, calibrated the shields for maximum efficiency, and enhanced the engine's feedback loops. By the time the Council inspectors arrived, the freighter was ready to show the galaxy a new kind of power, a human kind of ingenuity. And yet, Lyra knew that the true test was still to come. No one had seen the freighter in action beyond the docks. No one had experienced its speed, its agility, its clever problem-solving. The real challenge would not be fixing the ship. It would be proving its worth in the galaxy beyond Orion Station. As she floated in the cockpit, staring out at the vast expanse of stars, Lyra allowed herself a small smile. The freighter hummed softly around her, as if it understood the journey ahead. "We're ready," she whispered. "The galaxy isn't ready for us yet, but it will be." And for the first time, Lyra felt the thrill of possibility. This wasn't just a scrapped ship. This was a human creation, a human advantage, something no one in the galaxy had expected and something they would never forget. The freighter drifted silently in the docking bay, shadows dancing across its patched hull. It was no longer a forgotten relic. It was a spark of ingenuity, a machine that carried the human spirit in every wire, every thruster, every pulse of energy. And soon, it would prove that even the smallest, oldest, most overlooked ship could change the course of events in ways no one imagined. Orion Station was alive with movement. Cargo ships hummed in the docks, patrol cruisers glided past, and engineers floated from one task to another. Lyra Kane, however, hardly noticed the usual bustle. She was focused on something far bigger than the daily routines of the station. The freighter, once forgotten and ignored, now gleamed with purpose under the station's lights. Its patched hull seemed almost alive, its systems humming with quiet energy. The drones she had programmed hovered in formation around it, tiny sentinels waiting for her signal. The shields shimmered faintly, ready to respond to any threat. And the engines, oh, the engines, were tuned to perfection, able to pivot and accelerate with an agility that larger, more powerful ships could only dream of. Lyra's hands flew over the control panel as she ran final diagnostics. "We're ready," she said softly. The freighter hummed back as if agreeing. It had not been easy. Weeks of work, nights spent floating alone in the docking bay, careful testing and recalibration. Each step had been a challenge. And now the time had come to prove what she had been building. Not to the Council, not to the aliens in the docking bay, but to the galaxy itself. The first test came unexpectedly. A rogue fleet of freighters, miscreants who had ignored docking protocols for weeks, approached the station. Their pilots were reckless, panicked, and loud. The station's security forces scrambled to respond, but the fleet moved faster than anyone expected, weaving between cargo transports, shuttles, and floating debris. The situation was tense, and if the freighter wasn't ready, chaos could erupt. Lyra floated to the viewport, heart racing. "Okay, let's show them what we've got." She activated the drones, sending them in sweeping arcs around the freighter. Each drone carried a small pulse emitter, able to create gravitational shifts strong enough to redirect objects in space. Lyra guided them with precision, her hands dancing over the controls. As the rogue fleet advanced, the drones moved, nudging their ships gently but firmly off course. Cargo crates and loose debris formed safe channels, guiding the ships without colliding with them. The aliens watching from the station gasped. Some whispered, others stared in disbelief. "That human, she's controlling them like puppets," one said, wide-eyed. Lyra didn't answer. She focused on the task at hand. The freighter's shields activated, responding automatically to sudden movements. A small shuttle veered too close to a cargo container, and the shields pushed it gently into a safe orbit. A rogue freighter drifted off course, and a drone nudged it back toward the outer edge of the station. No alarms, no collisions, no damage. Just smooth, precise control. "This is impossible," muttered one of the alien engineers who had doubted her for weeks. "No ship this old should be able to do this." Lyra smiled faintly, her eyes on the holographic display. "It's not just the ship," she murmured. "It's the thinking behind it." The rogue fleet tried to regroup, expecting a traditional military response. But Orion Station's security forces were overwhelmed by the chaos of navigating around cargo and debris. Lyra saw her chance. She directed the drones to form a moving barrier, guiding the rogue ships into a wide corridor where they could maneuver safely without colliding. The freighter itself moved in fluid motions, twisting, pivoting, and adjusting in ways larger vessels couldn't. The result was astonishing. The rogue fleet found themselves neutralized, not by weapons but by clever use of space, gravity, and technology. The station was safe. Not a single ship was damaged. Not a single life was threatened. And in the center of it all floated the human freighter, calm and precise, its systems glowing softly as if it understood its own power. The aliens stared in awe. For the first time, they saw humans not as primitive tinkers, but as ingenious problem solvers capable of feats they couldn't imagine. The council inspectors who had doubted Lyra now hovered, mouths open, unable to find words. Lyra leaned back in the cockpit, letting the freighter drift gently. "That's the thing about humans," she said quietly. "We don't just fight problems, we solve them." But the rogue fleet wasn't done yet. One ship, larger and faster than the others, tried to break free, aiming to intimidate the station with its sheer size. Lyra's eyes narrowed. This was the real test. She activated the freighter's auxiliary thrusters, each movement precise and calculated. The drones moved to intercept, forming a moving net that nudged the larger ship into a slow, controlled drift. A pulse from the freighter's magnetic generators caused the ship's engines to overcompensate, spinning it gently but harmlessly away from the station. The rogue pilot's face was pale. What is controlling this?" he stammered, unable to understand what had just happened. Lyra pressed a button, bringing the freighter closer to the station. The shields pulsed once, a subtle wave that reminded everyone of the ship's presence and control. "Humans," she said softly, almost to herself, "we don't just build ships, we build possibilities." By the time the rogue fleet finally retreated, the station had settled into stunned silence. Engineers floated around, checking systems, making sure nothing had been damaged. Not a single person had been hurt. The freighter, however, floated in the middle of the bay, shining under the station lights, proof of human ingenuity and clever thinking. The younger aliens who had watched in awe now approached Lyra. How did you do that?" one asked, voice trembling. "No one has ever seen a ship respond like that." Lyra smiled, her hands resting lightly on the controls. "It's not magic," she said. "It's understanding, planning, seeing what no one else sees. Humans have been underestimated for centuries, and that works to our advantage." The council inspectors drifted closer, their expressions a mix of disbelief and respect. We may need to reconsider," one said, shaking his head. "This ship of this mechanic, she's shown something extraordinary." Lyra shrugged, a small grin tugging at her lips. "It's just a freighter," she said, "until you see what humans can do with a fleet of them." The freighter had done more than protect the station. It had changed perceptions. Humans were no longer just another species in the galaxy. They were innovators, thinkers, creators capable of turning the impossible into reality. And all it took was one scrapped ship, one determined mechanic, and the courage to see potential where others saw nothing. As the sun of Orion Station rose, casting golden light across the docking bay, Lyra floated out of the cockpit. Her eyes scanned the freighter, her pride and excitement impossible to hide. "We did it," she whispered, "and this is just the beginning." The aliens who had once scoffed now approached with questions, curiosity replacing skepticism. They wanted to understand, to learn, to witness more. And Lyra welcomed them, knowing that humans had only just begun to show what they could achieve. For the first time, the Orion cluster saw a human creation in action, and it was breathtaking. The freighter, once forgotten, once ignored, had become a symbol, not of power through destruction, but power through ingenuity, not of fear, but of respect. Humans had proven that they could turn scrap into brilliance, failure into triumph, and limitations into opportunities. And as Lyra looked out at the stars beyond the station, she allowed herself a small, confident smile. The galaxy had seen what one human could do with a ship. Imagine what humans could do with a fleet. The freighter hummed quietly, ready for the next challenge, ready to redefine what was possible. Lyra knew the real journey was just beginning. The rogue fleet had been a test, and humans had passed. The galaxy would never look at them the same way again. Humans didn't just survive. Humans thrived. And they did it in ways no one could have predicted. Weeks had passed since the rogue fleet incident. Orion Station was quiet again, but the atmosphere had changed. Whispers of the human mechanic and her remarkable freighter spread throughout the cluster. Engineers, pilots, and council representatives moved with a new sense of respect for the species they had long underestimated. Humans were no longer seen as mere tinkers. They were innovators, thinkers, problem solvers. Lyra Kane floated through the station's corridors, her tool belt swinging at her waist, her eyes alert and curious. Even in her casual walk, there was an energy that turned heads. Young aliens followed her in awe, while the older, skeptical engineers nodded quietly, acknowledging the talent they had previously dismissed. The freighter waited in the docking bay, its systems running quietly, drones hovering in perfect formation, shields pulsing softly like a heartbeat. It had become more than a ship. It was a symbol, a demonstration of what one determined human could accomplish with ingenuity, patience, and vision. Council representatives arrived that morning, this time with official purpose. The freighter had captured the attention of leaders across the Orion cluster, and now they wanted to study it. Lyra met them in the docking bay, her expression calm but confident. "You've done something remarkable," one council engineer said, voice filled with awe. "This ship, it performs in ways no one thought possible." Lyra nodded, her gaze sweeping across the freighter. "It's not just the ship," she said softly. "It's how humans think. We don't just follow instructions. We look at problems from every angle and we find solutions others don't even imagine." Another representative, a tall alien with metallic green skin, crossed his arms. "And what do you propose?" he asked. "We have fleets designed for combat and patrol." "How does your invention fit into that?" Lyra smiled. "It doesn't replace fleets. It changes how fleets can operate. You don't always need brute force. Sometimes creativity, adaptability, and understanding of physics are enough. This freighter is just one example. Imagine a fleet of ships like this, ships that can navigate danger, protect civilians, neutralize threats without destruction, respond to unexpected situations instantly." The representatives exchanged hesitant glances. They were used to fleets of large, heavily armed cruisers, relying on size and firepower. The idea that a small human ship could achieve more with brains than brawn was new and uncomfortable. But Lyra had expected that. Humans often succeeded when others doubted them. She simply let the freighter speak for itself. Over the next few days, she demonstrated its capabilities. The drones could lift and move massive cargo without touching it. The shields could redirect hazardous debris across wide distances. The auxiliary engines allowed the freighter to maneuver in tight spaces that larger ships could never reach. Even council engineers had to admit that the ship could operate where their most advanced cruisers might fail. A group of young alien mechanics, inspired by Lyra's ingenuity, approached her. "Can you teach us?" one asked, eyes wide. "We want to learn how you think." Lyra's smile widened. "It's not about following instructions," she said. "It's about observing, experimenting, and never accepting that something is impossible. Humans fail, we try again, and sometimes we discover something better than we imagined. That's how this ship works, and that's how humans work." Word of the freighter and Lyra's work spread across the Orion cluster. Fleet commanders requested her insight on retrofitting older ships, engineers asked for guidance on creative problem-solving, and young pilots begged to train under her. Humans, long considered secondary participants in galactic affairs, were now valued for something no one could manufacture: ingenuity. Lyra spent her days teaching, experimenting, and planning. She repaired other scrapped ships, transforming them into tools of safety and strategy rather than destruction. Each one carried a human signature, a combination of practicality, creativity, and adaptability. The station slowly transformed, buzzing with new energy as humans and aliens collaborated in ways that were impossible before. But Lyra's work was not without critics. Some senior council members grumbled about unpredictability and human recklessness. They worried that creativity without discipline could backfire. Lyra ignored them. She had learned long ago that humans often succeeded precisely because they embraced what others feared: the unknown, the unconventional, the impossible. One evening, she floated in the cockpit of her freighter, watching the station lights shimmer across its patched hull. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the first inspection of a broken, abandoned ship to this moment, every repair, every adjustment, every risk had led to something greater than herself. She had not only restored a freighter, she had redefined what humans could achieve. The freighter hummed softly beneath her, as if understanding her thoughts. It had survived ridicule, neglect, and doubt. It had grown stronger, smarter, and more capable because of human ingenuity. And it had proven to the galaxy that sometimes the smallest, most overlooked things held the greatest potential. A message arrived from a neighboring system, a request for assistance in navigating dangerous asteroid fields threatening trade routes. Lyra smiled and activated the freighter's systems. "Time to help," she whispered. As she guided the freighter out of the station, other ships followed, newly repaired vessels, drones, and curious pilots eager to see humans at work. The Orion cluster watched in awe as the freighter led them through dangerous space with precision and safety. No collisions, no casualties, just clever thinking and impeccable execution. Across the galaxy, stories of the human mechanic and her freighter spread like starlight. Young humans on distant colonies began tinkering with old ships, inspired by Lyra's work. Aliens, once skeptical, began to collaborate, learning that intelligence and creativity were as valuable as size and firepower. Humans became known as a species of innovators, capable of taking the impossible and making it real. Back at Orion Station, Lyra watched the freighter drift in orbit, its patched hull reflecting the glow of distant suns. It had started as scrap, a ship everyone ignored. Now it was a legend, proof that humans could achieve greatness even when underestimated. She floated back to her workbench, eyes scanning diagrams and tools. There were other ships, other puzzles, other problems waiting to be solved. The galaxy was wide, full of challenges, and humans thrived on challenges. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself a deep breath of satisfaction. The freighter had changed everything. It had protected, it had inspired, it had proven that humans could turn failure into triumph. And it was only the beginning. Orion Station had been transformed, but the galaxy would not be the same. Humans were now seen as a force not to be ignored. They were clever, resourceful, unpredictable, and unstoppable in ways no one had anticipated. And as Lyra floated in her workshop, planning her next project, she whispered to herself, a smile tugging at her lips. If they thought one freighter was impressive, just wait until they see what humans can really do. The freighter drifted quietly in orbit, a symbol of potential realized. It was no longer scrap. It was history, legend, and inspiration all in one. And the galaxy, wide and mysterious, would remember the name of Lyra Kane, the human mechanic who had transformed the forgotten into the extraordinary. Humans had been underestimated for centuries. Now, they had proven that underestimation was their greatest advantage. And with that, the stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter, as if celebrating the ingenuity of a species that refused to be ordinary.